I had been devotedly taking care of Amelia, my mother-in-law, but one day, she suddenly said, "I've decided to leave the house and all my assets to my daughter, my only family." Her sudden declaration left me speechless. I had never once discussed inheritance with Amelia. "Because you're an outsider. Only a fool would leave their inheritance to a stranger," she continued, her tone sharp and dismissive. Yet, I didn't resent her for it. I simply gave her a smile. My name is Evelyn. Currently, I live alone with Amelia. In the past, it wasn't just the two of us. My husband, Aiden, and father-in-law, Liam, had lived with us too. But Aiden passed away 16 years ago, and a few years later, Liam passed as well. Then, why am I living alone with Amelia now? It's because, before Aiden passed, he asked me, even after I'm gone, "Please don't abandon my parents." At that time, Aiden, our son Jackson, and I lived about an hour's drive from the in-laws' house. But after Aiden's death, I decided to honor his request by moving into the in-laws' house with Amelia and Liam. When it was decided that I'd move in with them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Jackson had to move to an apartment closer to his workplace, since commuting from the in-laws' house would have been too far. Aiden had a sister, Isabella, who lived nearby with her family after getting married. However, Isabella turned out to be quite the challenge. She seemed to think I was nothing more than a housekeeper, always ordering me around. But curiously, she never behaved that way in front of her husband, Caleb. This made me realize that Isabella knew her behavior was wrong. I once told Caleb about what she was doing, but he brushed it off, saying Isabella would never do something like that. That's when I realized I couldn't rely on him. When Liam was still alive, we shared the responsibility of taking care of Amelia, which allowed me to focus on housework. After he passed, I began working as a freelance illustrator from home to earn money while also caring for Amelia. It was a heavy burden, but as long as I met deadlines, I managed to balance caregiving and housework, squeezing in work whenever I could. Evelyn. Amelia called out to me as I was busy in the kitchen. Whenever she used that tone, it was usually a sign that she had something unpleasant to say. "Sorry for keeping you waiting. I was finishing up the dishes." "What's the matter? Don't make me wait just because of something as trivial as washing dishes." "I'm sorry. Honestly. Look over there and over there. There's trash everywhere. Clean it up right now." Amelia pointed to a small snack bag and a plastic bottle on the floor. "Amelia, I just cleaned that spot." "You put the trash there after I finished, didn't you? Are you blaming your poor cleaning skills on me?" Unbelievable. And so, the harassment began. "You neglect your cleaning because you're always fiddling with that computer. That's why Aiden got sick. I still don't understand why someone like you married him. If only I had forced him to break it off before the wedding." Criticizing me has become a habit for her. "I'm sorry, but I have never neglected my cleaning duties. I clean your room every day, don't I? And when I'm on the computer, I'm working. I explained my job to you before we got married. Remember? Now I just work from home, and it's not like I'm playing around. Stop making excuses. You always have some excuse. Don't contradict me." It always ends the same way, with her declaring, "My word is final." I left Amelia's room, using housework as my excuse. If you think this only happens with cleaning, imagine what it's like with cooking. What is this? It's so bland it's disgusting. Or are you trying to kill me with how salty this is? Every single meal comes with complaints. Early on, I even had friends taste my cooking to see if it was really that bad. Every single one of them told me it was delicious. That's when I realized she was just being spiteful. Nowadays, I don't let it bother me. Amelia might criticize me constantly, but she has her sloppy moments too. When Liam passed away, his inheritance was set to go to her, and she handed me the responsibility. Evelyn, Liam has some money. Make sure it gets deposited into my bank account properly. Liam's will is with a lawyer, as far as I know. So what? The money's coming to me. Just handle the paperwork. But Liam's inheritance is quiet. Just do as I say and stop talking. I understand. I ended up doing all the paperwork for the inheritance myself. Isabella is just as careless and lazy as Amelia. By law, the estate, house, and cash should have been divided among Amelia, Isabella, and Jackson according to Liam's will. But Isabella had other ideas. What? Do we need to get the house and land appraised? And then I get a quarter? That's such a hassle. Just waive my inheritance this time. I'll deal with it all when Mom passes. And with that, she opted out of the inheritance. For the past 16 years, I've done all the work jobs, housework, and caregiving for Amelia. Now that I'm over 50, I'm finding it harder to manage caregiving on my own. So I decided to bring it up with Amelia and Isabella. I'm over 50 now, and caregiving alone is becoming too much for me. Would you be able to help, even just on weekends, Isabella? Me? Caregiving? Absolutely not. Sure, we live nearby, but I've got kids, and I need to take care of them on my days off. That's right. Isabella has her family. She can't come here. And caregiving is the son's wife's duty. If caregiving is the son's wife's duty, then shouldn't the daughter share that responsibility too? And if that's not possible, we should consider hiring help or using adult day services. I don't want strangers touching me. And adult day services? That's just a waste of money. We're not doing that. How cruel of you, Evelyn, to suggest leaving Mom in the hands of strangers. I can't believe you'd think that way. That's not what I meant. I'm not hiring anyone, and I'm not spending money on adult day services. End of discussion. Defeated by the two of them, I resigned myself to continuing caregiving alone. The next day, as I was making lunch, I received a call from Jackson. Mom, how are you doing? I'm doing well. How about you? I'm good too. That's great to hear. So what's going on today? There's something I need to talk about. It's not something I want anyone else to overhear. So I was hoping we could meet at a nearby cafe. Normally, when Jackson wanted to talk, he'd come to the house. But if he felt he couldn't talk here, it must be about Amelia. All right. There's a small cafe nearby that's privately owned. How about there? Yeah, that sounds good. Send me the location later. How about tomorrow morning? That works for me. Let's meet there tomorrow morning. I told him I was looking forward to it and ended the call. Amelia tends to act annoyed whenever I leave the house, so I was sure she'd say something this time too. Amelia, I'll be going out tomorrow for a bit of shopping. I might get back a little late. There's no need to go so far just for shopping. The store has a big sale on household items. Everything's really cheap. Is that so? Well, if that's the case, I suppose it's fine. But don't dawdle and come straight back. I ended up lying to Amelia, but I felt relieved to have gotten her permission to go out. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. Arriving ahead of time has always been a habit of mine. Jackson hadn't arrived yet. I informed the staff that I was meeting someone and took a seat by the window, ordering a drink. How long had it been since I last enjoyed a moment like this in a cafe? Since starting to care for Amelia, I hadn't had the chance to spend such peaceful time outside. A little while later, I saw Jackson through the window. Sorry, Mom, I'm late. Don't worry about it. Are you tired? I've already ordered a drink, so why don't you get something too? As I spoke, Jackson looked at the menu and placed his order. We started with some light, casual conversation, but as the chatter faded, Jackson hesitated before saying, this might be hard to say, but, Mom, are you and Grandma not getting along? His question caught me off guard, and I felt at a loss for words. I couldn't vent about Amelia to Jackson. Why do you ask? Actually, Grandma called me a little while ago. The entire conversation was just her complaining about you, saying you were harassing her, and all sorts of things. Not content with bad-mouthing me to my face, Amelia had even called Jackson to speak ill of me. Well, I suppose you deserve to know. The truth is, I'm not the one harassing her. It's the other way around. So you're not harassing Grandma, are you, Mom? Jackson, you believe me. Of course I do. What Grandma said didn't add up. It was full of contradictions, so I didn't believe her for a second. Thank you for trusting me. Just so you know, I've been keeping records of everything Amelia says and does to me. If anything ever happens, I plan to use this as evidence. With that, I pulled a notebook out of my bag. I handed it to Jackson. I had been keeping a diary since before moving into the in-laws' house. After we started living together, and the harassment from Amelia and Isabella began, I started documenting everything they said and did to me. The notebook served as evidence, so I couldn't leave it at the in-laws' house where Amelia or Isabella might find and dispose of it. As a result, I always carried it with me. Though carrying several notebooks was cumbersome, it was worth the inconvenience to keep them safe. Jackson picked up one of the notebooks and began to read. His eyes widened in shock. Mom, has this been going on since Dad passed away? Yes, it has. Everything written in there is the truth, I said, watching as Jackson fell silent, deep in thought. For a moment, I wondered if the truth was too much for him to handle. I started to regret showing him the notebook, but that regret quickly disappeared. Even after all this, why are you still taking care of Grandma? Because it was a promise I made to Aiden. Even if it was Dad's request, this is just too much. Jackson then looked me directly in the eyes. There was a strength and determination in his gaze that I hadn't seen before. Mom, I have an idea. When Jackson shared his plan, I was shocked, but I decided to go along with it. However, Amelia called me multiple times. Ignoring her wasn't an option, so I finally picked up. What are you doing? What's wrong? I told you I'd be a little late today. It's way too late. What about my dinner? I left it on the table. I told you earlier to help yourself. I don't remember that. Get home immediately and prepare my dinner. She continued ranting, but I cut her off with a quick acknowledgement before hanging up. I'm sorry, I have to go now. Don't worry, we can continue the conversation over the phone or through text. That would be a big help. Thank you. With that, I parted ways with Jackson and headed home. As soon as I walked in, Amelia's angry voice greeted me. Evelyn, you're finally back. Hurry up and make my dinner. I'm home. I'll get it ready right away, so please wait a moment. I quickly prepared her meal and brought it to her room. You're always so slow, no matter what I ask you to do. I'm sorry. Never mind. Just finished setting the table already. I moved the table closer to her bed and arranged her meal on it. Amelia was particular about how her food was arranged, and if I didn't do it properly, she would surely complain. Amelia, it's ready. I'll be in the living room, so just call me when you're finished. With that, I left Amelia's room. I needed to start preparing to carry out what Jackson had suggested. However, I had to proceed carefully, making sure neither Amelia or Isabella would notice. Slowly, little by little, I moved forward while continuing to endure their harassment and gather evidence. A few months later, the moment finally came, catching me by surprise. Isabella was visiting, and she was talking with Amelia in her room. As I brought in Amelia's meal, she spoke to me. "Evelyn, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "When I pass away, this house and my inheritance will remain, won't they?" "Yes, that's correct. I've decided to leave everything, the house and the inheritance, to Isabella, my only precious family." Her sudden declaration left me speechless. Why was she bringing this up now? I had never discussed inheritance with her. I never expected her to leave anything to me, knowing how she was. Why bring up inheritance all of a sudden? "Because you're an outsider. Only a fool would leave their inheritance to someone who isn't family," she continued with a smug look on her face. But I didn't feel sad or disappointed about not receiving the inheritance. In fact, her timing couldn't have been better. When I stayed silent, Amelia seemed to mistake my reaction for shock, and her expression twisted into a malicious grin. "As if you'd ever inherit anything from me. Did you actually think you would? Don't get any ideas just because you've been taking care of me. You won't get anything." Amelia and Isabella were likely reveling in their shared sense of superiority as they mocked me. But I smiled at Amelia and said, "I completely agree. That's why I'm leaving today." "What? Excuse me? Leaving? What do you mean by that?" "Exactly what I said. I'm moving out today and into a new place." The shock on Amelia and Isabella's faces was almost comical. This was Jackson's plan. Since Jackson had invited me to live with him, I didn't have to go through the trouble of finding a new home. "You can't do that." "Exactly. Aiden asked you to take care of Mom. Are you just going to ignore his request?" It was true that Aiden had asked me to look after Amelia. However, I had already spent 16 years longer than my married life taking care of Amelia. Perhaps it was time to start thinking about my own happiness. With that in mind, I decided to follow Jackson's suggestion. "You're right. Aiden did ask me to care for Amelia, but Isabella lives nearby, and you can manage without me. Isabella has been visiting frequently, hasn't she? If she has the time to visit so often, she can take over Amelia's care. In fact, I'll leave so you can live here together." "What? I'm not doing caregiving. That's the job of the son's wife. It's your responsibility. But caregiving is legally the responsibility of the biological children." That meant Isabella was the one obligated to take care of Amelia. "That's not true. Besides, I've already filed the paperwork with the family court to sever my legal ties with this family." "When did you?" Amelia seemed ready to argue further, but the sound of the doorbell interrupted her. Who could that be at a time like this? She grumbled as she headed to the door. I heard the sound of the door opening, followed by voices arguing. Moments later, footsteps echoed down the hall. "Mom, I'm here to pick you up." The voice belonged to Jackson. "You're early, Jackson." "Perfect timing. I haven't finished packing my last bag yet." "Could you wait just a bit longer?" "Of course. Do you need help?" "No, it's fine." With that, I went to my room. Since I had been moving things gradually to Jackson's place, I only had one suitcase left to pack. I finished packing the suitcase I had prepared earlier, the room I had lived in for 16 years. Despite the conflicts with Amelia, there were still memories here. It would have been nice to take those memories with me, but such a thing was impossible. I finished packing the last of my belongings and took one final look around the room. The joy of being freed from Amelia and Isabella, mixed with the sadness of leaving behind a place I'd lived in for so long. I stepped out of my room. "Jackson, I'm ready. Shall we go?" I wasn't waiting. "Is that all your luggage?" Let me carry it for you." He took the bag from my hand. "Amelia, Isabella, thank you for everything up until now. From now on, you'll have to work together as a family to get by." I placed the house key on the table. Jackson and I walked toward the door. Even as we left the house, there was no sign of anyone trying to stop us. I climbed into the passenger seat. "All right, let's get going. You didn't forget anything, did you?" "No, I'm fine. I've already moved all the important things to your place. And even if I forgot something now, it wouldn't be worth going back for." "Good to hear." And so, Jackson and I left the in-laws' house behind. "Mom, you did so well. 16 years. That's incredible." "Thank you. Honestly, I wish I'd heard some words of gratitude from them." "That's unlikely. To them, you were nothing more than a housekeeper." "You're probably right. From now on, prioritize yourself. Live your life without being tied down by anyone." That's exactly what I plan to do. I had finally gained my freedom. When I arrived at Jackson's house, a wave of exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed me, and I ended up bedridden for 2 days. Once I recovered, I immediately contacted the lawyer who had handled Aiden and Liam's wills to proceed with a claim for damages against Amelia and Isabella. The lawyer determined I had sufficient evidence, as I had meticulously documented their harassment in my diaries and recordings. What she had done to me went far beyond mere snide remarks. As for Isabella, she had frequently entered my room without permission, stealing my clothes and jewelry. I had even recorded video evidence of her actions. The lawyer later informed me that formal demand letters had been sent to both Amelia and Isabella. All that was left was to wait for their payment. However, days passed, and no payment was made. When I contacted the lawyer, I learned that both Amelia and Isabella were refusing to pay and insisting on a reduction in the amount. But I had no intention of agreeing to a reduction. I left everything in the lawyer's hands. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my smartphone suddenly rang. When I looked at the screen, I saw Jackson's name. I wondered if a sudden meeting had come up and Jackson wouldn't need dinner. With that thought, I answered his call. "Hello, what's wrong?" "Mom, I'm so glad you picked up." Jackson sounded out of breath, like he had been running. "Why are you so out of breath? What happened?" Actually, what Jackson told me was shocking. As he was leaving work, someone linked arms with him. Startled, he looked over to see Isabella standing there, stunned into silence. He listened as she said, "I finally found you. Evelyn is demanding damages from me. Do something about it." How did she know where he worked? Then I remembered that when Jackson got the job, I had told Amelia about it. She must have remembered and passed the information on to Isabella. "Step away. Mom is seeking damages because of the emotional distress you and Amelia caused her. You need to take responsibility and pay," Jackson had told her. "Emotional distress. That's my line." Isabella had snapped back, refusing to pay, and even threatening to file her own claim. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I left because she wasn't making any sense. I think I'm fine, but just in case, I'm planning to stay at a hotel tonight." "That sounds like a good idea. She might have figured out where you live, so make sure the house is secure. Call me if anything happens." "I will. You take care too, Jackson." With that, I ended the call. I never thought Isabella would go as far as to confront Jackson in person. Amelia, being unable to walk without assistance, was unlikely to come herself. I went around the house, checking that all the windows and doors were locked. Staying in the house alone under such circumstances was unsettling, but I couldn't ask Jackson to come back. That night, I struggled to sleep and didn't go to bed until late. The next morning, I called Jackson to let him know nothing had happened overnight. Maybe she only knows where my workplace is, Jackson speculated. I'm thinking of consulting the lawyer about this, I replied. That's probably a good idea, but I've got an important meeting this morning. I'll come home as soon as it's done, so please stay in the house until then. All right, I'll wait for you. I checked the area outside from my window, but saw nothing suspicious. A few hours later, I heard the sound of the front door opening. I'm back. Let's head out now, Jackson said. We left the house, making sure to lock the door behind us. As we were about to get into the car, I heard a voice shout, "I found you." Turning toward the sound, I saw Isabella standing there. It's a good thing I decided to stake out Jackson's office this morning. I lost him yesterday because he ran, but today, he didn't even notice me. Following you here was easy, she said, laughing. Staking out his workplace since morning, her persistence was unbelievable. Mom, I'm sorry. I never thought she'd be there that early, Jackson said apologetically. I guess it can't be helped. I wouldn't expect anyone to anticipate she'd stake out your workplace since morning, I said. Exactly. Now, Evelyn, I have something to discuss with you, Isabella interrupted. Yesterday, Jackson told me about it. It's about the damages, isn't it? I replied calmly. Hearing this, Isabella glared at me. That's right. Since you already know, let's make this quick. Drop the claim for damages. Why should I? For 16 years after Aiden passed, I endured your harassment while taking care of Amelia. It was pure agony. All I'm asking for is to be compensated for that suffering. We were merely teaching you the responsibilities of being Aiden's wife. Calling that harassment is ridiculous, and those so-called teachings caused me immense emotional distress. Can you compensate for that distress in any way other than financially? Well, Isabella was at a loss for words, though she continued to glare at me. But her glare didn't intimidate me in the slightest. So an apology will suffice then, she sneered. Do you really think your apology holds that much value? I asked. What did you just say? Of course, it does. This is unbelievable. Let me make it clear, your apology is worth absolutely nothing. You're such an insolent little. Isabella yelled as she grabbed a nearby potted plant and lunged at Jackson. Jackson, watch out, I screamed. However, Jackson calmly subdued Isabella as she charged toward him. As it turns out, Jackson has trained in judo as a form of self-defense since he was a child. Although his busy work schedule rarely allows him to practice these days, he still visits the dojo whenever he has free time. Mom, call the police, Jackson commanded. Snapped back to reality by his voice, I fumbled to retrieve my smartphone and dialed the police. Let go of me. I didn't do anything. Don't you dare touch me, Isabella shouted, hurling insults at Jackson. I've contacted the police. They said they'll be here shortly. Can you handle her until then? Is there anything I can do to help? I asked. I've got this, Mom. Just wait by the road so you can guide the officers here when they arrive, Jackson replied firmly. All right, but let me know if you need anything, I said, moving toward the road. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. I stood by the road, signaling the officers as they arrived. During this time, Isabella continued to scream insults at Jackson. Don't you dare call the police. I'm not in the wrong. I'm not. The officers restrained Isabella and escorted her to their vehicle. Jackson and I followed them to the station to give our statements. By the time everything was resolved and we left the police station, it was already dark. It's so dark outside now, I said, glancing at the sky. Who knew giving a statement would take so long? It was an eye-opening experience, Jackson replied. I'd heard about it before, but I didn't expect it to take this long. Let's visit the lawyer tomorrow. It's too late now, I suggested. Good idea. I've cleared my morning schedule, so we can go first thing tomorrow. Jackson agreed. Exhausted, we both fell asleep as soon as we got home. The next day, Jackson and I visited the lawyer. We detailed everything that had happened, Isabella staking out Jackson's workplace, following him home, and attempting to throw a potted plant at him. Although Isabella's actions didn't result in any physical harm, the lawyer confirmed that a restraining order could be issued against her. Additionally, the new incidents would be added to our claim for damages. According to the lawyer, Isabella had arrogantly remarked, "With Dad's inheritance, I can easily pay this off." However, neither Emilian or Isabella had taken the time to review the inheritance paperwork themselves, as they had left the entire process to me. They likely had no idea what they actually inherited. Liam's inheritance consisted solely of debt. Unbeknownst to Amelia, Liam had been secretly gambling, amassing loans from various financial institutions. The total debt had reached $100,000. I didn't advise Amelia to renounce the inheritance, because doing so would have required selling the house. While I lived with them, I had been the one covering the payments, but since I had ended our cohabitation, I was no longer obligated to pay. Not that I ever truly was, in the first place. On top of gambling, Liam had also been frequenting pubs. It seemed he had used the house as collateral for additional loans, so the in-laws' house would likely be foreclosed eventually. A few weeks after Isabella's outburst, thanks to the lawyer's efforts, I was able to collect the full damages from both Amelia and Isabella. After paying the damages, she apparently filed for bankruptcy. She contacted the lawyer, saying she wanted to meet me in person and apologize, but I refused because I didn't want to see her. She was probably hoping to ask me for money. Although she reached out a few more times, I continued to refuse, and eventually the calls stopped altogether. As for Isabella, when Caleb found out about the damages, he filed for divorce. Isabella tried to plead and refused the divorce, but she was ultimately thrown out of the house. Naturally, Caleb was awarded custody of the children and began demanding monthly child support payments from Isabella. With damages and child support combined, her financial burden must be immense. Isabella apparently attempted to gain custody of the children, but since Caleb had been their primary caregiver, the children chose to stay with him. Given how often Isabella had visited the in-laws' house alone, it was clear she had done very little parenting. It was her own doing. Isabella also contacted my lawyer, but just like with Amelia's calls, I refused to respond. Now Isabella reportedly lives alone in a small, cheap apartment. Amelia has also moved into a different unit in the same apartment complex, though I've heard their lives are quite difficult. It no longer concerns me since I've received the full damages owed to me. With the damages from Amelia and Isabella, I've decided to use the money to move into an assisted living facility. I told Jackson, "You could always stay here. You don't have to leave." Jackson replied, "I can't do that. If you get a girlfriend, get married, and have kids, I'll only make things harder for your wife. Then I'll find a girlfriend who's fine with living with you." "How about that?" Jackson said, grinning. "That's not the point, Jackson. Assisted living facilities are really wonderful places. I can't move in just yet, so I'll stay with you until then," I explained. "That's perfectly fine, Mom," Jackson reassured me. "Thank you. I hope I'm not inconveniencing you." "Not at all. Hey, how about we visit that assisted living facility together sometime? That way, I can hear about it firsthand and feel reassured," he suggested. "That sounds like a good idea," I agreed. 16 years of caregiving. Those years were grueling and harsh, but I don't see them as wasted. Those 16 years shaped the person I am today. Although I didn't see Amelia's caregiving through to the very end, I devoted 16 years of my life to it. That should be enough to fulfill the promise I made to Aiden. At least, I want to believe it is. From now on, I will live for myself, without interference from anyone else. I spoke to Aiden's photograph, telling him that I'm living happily now. Sometime later, I met someone very special, but that's a story for another day.